Pixar has always been one of my favorite movie studios of all time. They shaped my childhood, and now this weekend, their latest film is coming to Disney+. Should be in theaters, but that is Luca. This is their 24th film, and today I'm going to be ranking them from worst to best. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section. And again, this is my ranking. This is my opinion. Everyone's going to rank it a little bit different, but I can't wait to have you guys along for the ride. So without further ado, let's get started. Coming down at my number 24 is Cars 2. No shock there, Cars 2 is, pretty much a film made for kids. There's no real big message along for the ride in here. And in general, shifting your main character to being who is Mater, that should not be a thing. Mater should never be a main character. For maybe short increments, yes, but that's why he's so good as a supporting character in the first Cars. Cars 2 kind of adds this new flair, kind of going in a spy route. Didn't work. There's again some fun humor in there, but when you watch this one, you just leave going, that was totally forgettable, and very much not feeling like a straight-to-theater film, very much more feeling like a direct-to-video one, something that you would watch back in the day when Disney would do those direct-to-video films, which some were good, but a lot of them were not. And at my number 23 is The Good Dinosaur. Now, this film in particular has some of the best animation Pixar has really much ever established. But when it comes down to the crux of it, while I enjoyed this movie, I do find a lot of it lacking. When I go back, I never have the inkling to go back and rewatch this one per se. Again, the animation is stunning, and the bond between the dinosaur and the cave boy is a lot of fun. I can't really remember their name. I remember Spot for the most part, but that's it. Again, that relationship is nice, and there's again some beautifully knitted, heartwarming family elements in there, but it very much is something that we have seen all the time before. And for me, The Good Dinosaur is just, again, one of those forgettable films that feels like something that another animated studio did, but it actually is Pixar that had done it. And at my number 22, we have Cars 3. Again, a pretty good one that comes off a bad film in this franchise, but comes back and says, hey, we are here to play. And in the general, it's not a bad film. It's a good, decent one, but again, not one that I want to rewatch, which goes to a lot of this. The way that I rank these is the way that I would rewatch films, and in general, rewatch ability. For me, Cars 3, I don't feel like has that. For a younger audience, yes, there is some, again, colorful, fun, great animation, and I really did love the story between Cruz Ramirez and Lightning McQueen itself, but this is, in fact, the only Pixar film I do not own yet, and I'm really much just waiting for it to go down in price before I pick it up for my collection, and if that doesn't say anything, then what else does? Because I even own Cars 2, and while I got it for $5, I own Cars 2. And at my number 21, we have Brave. Now, Brave is an interesting one because I feel like there's half of this film that is absolutely great, and the other half's just generic animated film that I've seen before. For me, I love the character of Meredith. I think she's a wonderful little character that, for me, when it comes to all the other Disney princesses, she has this unique tone to her. And in general, I like the style in here. I love the magic, the mysticism that they bring in here. And everything with the bears, adorable, cute. And of course, the mother-daughter relationship in here I found to be very important. And again, rising above what other people feel like we should be in our society. Brave has great messages in there. But when you get to the back half of the film, it becomes very predictable and something that, again, I just don't care to fully rewatch. Which brings me to my number 20. That is Finding Dory, which for me, it's like, why would I watch this when I have Finding Nemo to go watch? Dory is a fun little side adventure that continues one of our favorite fishes, who, again, is a great side character, but in a full capacity, I feel like she doesn't work all the way. And even along for the ride in here, one of the big aspects that made Finding Nemo so great is the fact that you had all these other side characters really much becoming big, bombastic, and so memorable. For me, Dory, the only one that I can really remember off the top of my head is Hank the Octopus, and that's it. While Hank was really cool as an animation style, and I liked his story per se, none of the other characters in there really came off as memorable in any sort of light. When it comes down to an adventure, there's aspects that I remember of Finding Dory, but again, I don't remember the full adventure, where like other Pixar films in here, I remember every single aspect of it, and I just smile and laugh to myself when I think about those. And that's where it brings me to my number 19, which brings me to Cars, which for me, when I was younger, I loved this movie, and I still find this one enjoyable. Pretty much 19 and above, I wouldn't mind rewatching any of these movies. I always find them delightful, smiling, and yeah, while some of it may cater to a different demographic, this is one that I actually quite enjoy. I find Cars to be just a nice movie that really much shows off a different personality and a different style of life to something that we haven't seen before. And I think kids at a younger age will really much like this. And while this film very much feels like it was made for product placement, that's okay at times. I like Cars for what it is, and I like Lightning McQueen himself as a main character, plus all the other characters in Route 66. That was where the heart and charm really much lies in this franchise. And at my number 18, it is one of the most underrated Pixar films, and that is Monsters University. Now for me, I find this film to be completely hilarious. It's so fun that Pixar really much took two of our favorite iconic duos in cinema, Mike and Sully, and showed us how they became best friends in college, but even going on top of that, seeing how this is more of an actual college frat party type house film, something in the vein of Project X, kind of works. And while it's not as wild as a Project X, it's just enjoyable and fun to see where these two characters come from. When it comes to Monsters University, it has the heart and soul of a Pixar film, but where is that emotion? I always will reiterate this every time I talk about Monsters University. This film would have had such a heart-wrenching and really much tying the whole film together if it would have ended with Mike and Sully talking to Boo before she went off to college. God, the tears would have wept through my eyes, and it would have been a perfect story overall, but still an enjoyable film. Down at my number 17 is The Incredibles 2, the long-awaited sequel all of us waited for so long, and it's a good sequel. It's pretty great, actually. While the villain is pretty much predictable and you definitely know where it is going from point A to point B, switching the heroes and deciding who is actually going to be the main hero in here was an excellent choice. Elastigirl actually come into her own and actually be the main hero for this family, while Bob Parker has to stay at home and take care of Jack Jack, was such a smart and clever way of taking this about. Plus, expanding and touching on other heroes that had taken on into this world made for a unique aspect. I love how this took place right after the first Incredibles. Love how it touches on more into the superhero world that is set up in the first film. Now, for me, the reason that it comes down in here is when I come down to rewatchability, I would rather rewatch the first one. The animation's stunning, it's absolutely hilarious, it's great, but I love the midlife crisis element that the first Incredibles very much had, and really honestly, depending on this, you can go back or forth. Both films are great, but I prefer the first one. And at my number 16, it is Onward. Now, Onward was a delightful surprise. I truly wasn't that excited for this movie when it was announced. I was like, we've seen so many fantasy things, I'm sure Pixar will have something magical here, but when I went to see this film, I was sitting there laughing, smiling, then I see that they're trying to bring their father back for one more day. And the tears, the emotion started hitting me way too hard. And when you get to the third act, that absolutely just brings you to an emotional wreck. Onward succeeds in there with its fascinating world building, great characters, great brother relationship in here, but very much an emotional resolution that absolutely hits you in all the right ways. Onward for me is one of the more underrated Pixar films, and I really think more people should talk about this. It came out in that weird time where it was kind of in the pandemic, where it kind of wasn't. But I really think a lot of people missed out on Onward, and you should definitely check it out if you never have. My number 15, we have A Bug's Life. Now, this film is so good. It's so clever in its humor, and I love the intrigue of bringing these characters to life. Plus, the circus gang is so memorable. Bug's Life for me is actually a movie that's moved up more on my list. When I was a kid, this is one that I really didn't care to rewatch. But as time has gone on and I've revisited this film over the years, it has become one of my kind of favorite Pixar films to kind of just pop in and enjoy. It came out at a weird time in between the Toy Story films and going into whatever Pixar was going to do next, and it kind of became that, again, underrated movie, kind of like how Onward was. Onward was in between a couple of fantastic Pixar films, but for me, Bug's Life is one movie that a lot of people forget to talk about, and they really shouldn't. The cast is great, the characters are fantastic, and it really much brings you into the size of how it feels to be a little ant in this time period. But again, it's very much succeeds on its cleverness, and I've just always really liked Bug's Life, and the more and more that I grow, the more and more I like it. And at my number 14 is the brand new Pixar film, Luca. Now, at this point, I have seen the film twice, and I can't wait to see it again. This is something different that I don't think Pixar has done yet before, and I say this because Pixar does a lot of these films that goes big and bold. Whether you look at Soul and the entire Soul world, they really much grew in there. Or Coco and the Day of the Dead world that they brought to life. Even in the likes of course, Onward and the world building that in there, and Toy Story 4, lately they've been kind of going big and bombastic. But at the center of it, I like when they touch on a more solid story. And all those stories really much have that really big theme of either discovery, acceptance, or something of that nature. Now, Luca has all of that, but it touches on something that I don't think Pixar has done before, and that is a true coming-of-age story. In this coming-of-age story, it very much is about a young kid growing up who learns, hey, discovery, where I'm living at is not everything that I know about this world, and coming to learn more about it. And just the fact of these two kids and what, like, their main goal is, just makes so much sense, because when we were a kid, our goals were that small, and the fact that Luca took me back to when I was a kid just made me absolutely bawl, smile, and laugh. I loved Luca. I think Luca is a fantastic movie, and it's gonna go down, I really do believe, as one of the more underrated Pixar films, because I feel like a lot of people will sit there and be like, well, it didn't do this, it didn't do this. Guys, they didn't need to go to Atlantis. That's not the point of this. There's such a more meaningful light in there, and especially in the way that they tackle friendship. Just awesome. It's perfect. Coming down at my number 13 is Up. There's a lot of funny things. I went back and forth between Up and Luca, and honestly, over the years, Luca will probably move up. I really love Up, and I love the first 8 minutes, but for me, I feel as the film goes on, it loses a little bit of steam when you finally meet the talking dogs, the actual villain, and all of that nature. And even though it does lose some of its steam in that little bit of an act, the whole motto of "His venture is out there" just gets me so hyped. I love the characters of Up. I think it really much brings so much to life and really much reminds us of really much adventure is out there, and we need to go all the way to it. Up remains to have some of the most memorable Pixar characters ever, and it becomes a movie that I love rewatching every here and there. Of course, at my number 12 is the silent film, for most part of it, WALL-E. Now, WALL-E, I think, again, kind of has the same thing of Up. It does lose some of its steam towards the back half, but I love how this is very much a romance between two unlikely lovers, Ellie and Eve, two beautifully created characters, but very much a risk. There's like zero dialogue in the first act of this movie. It's just really much about WALL-E, and then Eve comes in the picture, and then the way that they bond. Once WALL-E does go on his adventure, it does get a little bit zany and crazy, but even then, I have fun with that. I just think an aspect of this that does bring it down is, of course, the way of looking at all the big people in here and seeing how big they've gotten. Now, again, this is really much shaping on our society today, and it is a nice conversational piece within there, and I actually like that. But again, some of the humor becomes a little bit too cringe in there, but even then, WALL-E just becomes a very memorable adventure that I love journeying back to. It's a beautiful film, and again, one that I don't think a lot of people understand fully. At my number 11, we got Monsters, Inc. Now, of course, it features against two duos that I talked about earlier for the university, and that is Mike and Sully. Two characters that I love to pieces so much. Every time I get to go back in this, it's really much them two that hone in. Much Monsters, Inc. just becomes a very memorable movie in that. It's a classic Pixar film, and Pixar has many classic animated films, but Monsters, Inc. was one of their first, and it remains one of their best. Now, coming down at my number 10 is, of course, Inside Out. A movie that absolutely brought me to tears and very much became very memorable in a lot of ways. A lot of the reason because of bing bong, and everything of that nature of how it goes about. But one of the things I really liked about this was the way that they took on the perspective of a young child's mind and all the different emotions that might run through their head. That's something that I didn't expect or really much think that I would be able to go through, but Inside Out excels in that nature, and I could not stop watching this damn movie. It is so freaking fantastic, and if you have not watched Inside Out yet, this is one that you should. It, again, beautiful animation, so creative, so unique, and all the different emotions bring such a unique personality and flavor to a movie that really much needed it. At this time, Pixar kind of was at a loss of all the films that they had seen before. Not bad films, just very not memorable. Inside Out brought us back to that streak, and I'm so excited to see the winning streak that they've been on ever since. And at my number 9, it is Coco, a film that I actually wasn't too excited for when they had announced it. I was supposed to see this film early, ended up not going to it, then I heard all the love and raves about it, and I'm like, I messed up. I should have gone and seen it. But for me, when I went and saw Coco, I was blown away. Remember, I went to a very late night showing of the film and I sat there just in awe. Not just from the beautiful animation, the world that they brought to... They literally brought the Day of the Dead world to life. All the colorful aspects of it. The thing that really much brought this to life for me was seeing this different and unique culture that I never grew up in, but again, a lot of my friends did, and actually understanding, and really much understanding this holiday. It very much became something that was so unique and important, and I loved being able to really get sucked into it all. And I think the other thing about Coco is the music that swells you in each and every scene. The aspect and message between family is so important, and really much by the end of Coco, if you are not in tears, you're probably a heartless person. And at my number 8 is Ratatouille. I've always gone out and say that this is probably the most underrated Pixar film because it's about a rat who cooks, and there's so much more to it. But not a lot of people talk about this. When you ask someone, what's your favorite Pixar film? They never say Ratatouille, but they should. And in fact, in a lot of conversations I've had, a lot of people have told me that Ratatouille isn't even, they've never even seen it, which I go, what? How? Brad Bird directs probably the most mature film yet in the Pixar things. It's super clever, it's super unique, but I find this film to be more towards adults, and I think kids can still enjoy it for what it is, but the adults will get the most out of it. A lot of great themes in here, and again, there's just something for everyone in this. And that's what makes Pixar so great, is they make films for not just kids, but that adults. More things that I can say is they make animated films for adults, but that kids can enjoy. And at my number 7, it is Toy Story 4. Now, I go down and say this, all my Toy Story films, if I could make it, it'd be all number 1. I count them all as just one film. It's my favorite franchise of all time. I love Toy Story to death. And Toy Story 4 on some days might be even my favorite one. This is a movie that I find all Toy Story films to attack me at one point in time in my life. And every time I need one, they come out. And in the place that I was at, I just graduated college, or was about to, and Toy Story 4 came out, and I just sat there in absolute, utter despair, and I needed this film. I found it to be so heartwarming and charming, and I love the way that they brought in all these new characters, but really much made this a more personal story for Woody. And his theme of, again, discovery, and discovering, like, maybe my meaning of life, and really much touching on the meaning of life, which another film in this category we'll be touching on in a little bit soon, but touching on, like, what is my purpose in this world? You know, I thought it was this, but now it's not. Well, where does that go next? What is the next chapter of my evolution? What is the next chapter of my life? Should I be selfish and go and do this? There are aspects that Toy Story 4 adds into there, and I found it to be just so clever, unique, amazing, and a great ending to Woody's story. I do think there's still some stuff in there for, of course, Buzz and Jessie, but when it comes down to Woody's story, this was a fantastic conclusion, and I think it just was a perfect epilogue to one of the best trilogies of all time. And at my number 6, it is Pixar's Soul, my favorite film of last year, and absolutely the movie that, like I just mentioned, touches on the aspect of what is the meaning of life. This film absolutely destroyed me, utterly destroyed me. When I watched this film, I sat there in just utter despair, sitting there trying to hold back the tears. And while it does get a little bit weird with like the cat and stuff in the middle, I actually think that just works. And like I mentioned, Pixar makes films that are for adults but kids can enjoy, and when they succeed on that tension, they do. And I think Soul has that element to where kids can enjoy some of the fun aspects, but the deeper meanings can really much hit adults in a lot of different ways. I think if you're very unsure of where you are in life, I think Soul really much has your back in that category. Plus the score, the world, all that sorts of stuff they built up out in here was just superb. And I really much feel like Inside Out was the prototype before Soul, and really much establishing every layer that they needed to hit for the future. In a sense, this is kind of a spiritual successor or a spiritual sequel to Inside Out. Guys, before we hit my top 5, make sure again to hit that like and subscribe button so I can hear all your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section, of course, as well as your ranking with the brand new Disney film Luca debuting on Disney Plus this weekend. And of course, guys, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. And if you enjoy rankings, movies, games, TV, I'm the Wolf of Geek Street, and this is your channel for you guys. Coming down on my number 5 is Toy Story 3, a film that I thought was the ending of Toy Story, and when it ended, I was so sad because while it ended perfectly, I sat there going, I want more adventures with my favorite gang. And like I've mentioned, Toy Story is my favorite franchise of all time. I still have my original Buzz and Woody from when I was a kid, and I will never get rid of those. I have an entire Toy Story collection, and Toy Story 3 meant so much to me. Again, emotional, seeing them go to this daycare center, Lotso being probably the best Pixar villain ever. It just was a fascinating watch, and as I sat there in disbelief that we're actually getting a Toy Story 3 after all these years, every time I rewatch this film, I just find it to be one of the best films ever made, and in general, ending off a cliff note. And like I said, Toy Story 4, a perfect epilogue to the entire Toy Story franchise. Toy Story 3 was that perfect ending for Andy's story, and of course, that symbolic meaning of them being his toys. It was a perfect pass down of it, and this film just absolutely knocked me on my ass, and it still remains one of the best films I've ever seen, and one of the best theater experiences I've ever seen. So at my number 4, it is Finding Nemo. Now, like I mentioned, Finding Dory is a fun little movie, but why would you watch it when you got Finding Nemo to go back to? The animation is still flawless for this. But for me, the journey of seeing Nemo and the Tank Gang, which I absolutely love that little subplot, I think it's fantastic, but the way they interweave it into, of course, Marlin and Dory's story of trying to get to Australia to find his son is really much great. The editing in there is great. There's never a part where you're sitting there like, okay, well, let's go back to the other story. I want to see that one going on. You never have that issue. And sometimes when you do films like this and you split it down the middle, you can have that issue. But thankfully, you don't at all here. And actually, what Finding Nemo does here is it excels in all of its different ways, and I absolutely eat this film up every single time I go back to rewatch it. It is so quotable, it is so memorable, it is so clever, and it has every single sequence in here is just phenomenal. And coming down at my number 3, it is Toy Story 2. Now, some days this is my favorite Pixar film of all time. It mixes aspects of Indiana Jones and even of the likes of Star Wars, but still diving into that classic Pixar avenue that it needs to do, where it touches on what is our purpose, and Woody looking for that here when he is stolen from Al and he finds his actual gang. Is this where I belong? Is this where I deserve to be? And then, of course, again, intersplicing that with Buzz's adventure, which very much is the Indiana Jones Star Wars adventure that we really much love. Seeing these toys to go to unknown lands as a toy, but as an adult, we know exactly where they're all. Hilarious, funny, it is on top of its seat. You're sitting there on edge, and you absolutely just eat up every single moment of it. I love Toy Story 2 for that. And again, intersplicing it and making both stories work to the point where you're like, you're okay with Woody stuff and you're okay with Buzz's. You're totally entertained all the way. I love Toy Story 2. I could rewatch this film every damn day. And at my number 2, it is The Incredibles. This film is just absolutely top-notch, one of the best superhero films ever created. In fact, a lot of people say it's the best Fantastic Four film we've ever gotten, and I understand. The Incredibles is very much the super family film that deals with the father getting a midlife crisis to where he misses being a superhero. And the fact of that concept really much working and establishing a world that did have superheroes, but then once Mr. Incredible messes up, he must go back. And once Mr. Incredible messes up, he has to go back and fix these things and very much goes into retirement. It's weird, it's unique, but it's something that very much feels real in today's society if superheroes were a thing. In fact, it's really cool looking back at this film to where superhero films weren't the best thing of that back in the day, but nowadays you look at it and there's like a new superhero property coming out every single week. For me, The Incredibles works on this level because it very much is a satire towards some of the stuff going on in our world now, but at the same time touching on some of the aspects that means to be an adult. You know, I'm not a full-grown adult yet. I'm still only 24 years old, but there's so much that The Incredibles hits more and more every single time I rewatch it every single year as I get older and older. And of course, at my number 1, it is the first Toy Story film. It's the first Pixar film ever, and for me, it's probably the best script they've ever written yet. While I don't think it dives into all that meaningful things and meaningful messages that some of the other Toy Story films and other Pixar films dive into, nostalgic-wise, this film's just flat-out awesome. It, you know, definitely the animation does not hold up completely. This is their oldest film, like I mentioned, but the fact that this really much broke way for 3D animation and showed it can be great looking, it really is. And I just love seeing the origin story of Woody and Buzz here and seeing how they very much, where we know they end up coming to be, seeing where they started out in here. I could rewatch Toy Story every single day. I love the cleverness of seeing what happens when you leave the room and your toys do come to life, you know? And they're interacting and they have all these different stories and adventures, and then Sid takes them over and it's just so clever. I love the original Toy Story, and I'm sure many of you guys do as well. And I'm really curious to hear what your first Pixar film you remember seeing was. Let's hear about it down below, guys. And of course, thank you guys so much for clicking on this ranking. Make sure to head on over to Sam Sean Films on how to see films really. And of course, there's a big thank you to you and a big thank you to my Patreon supporters, because without you, I would not be able to do this. So of course, guys, until next time, stay classy.